Hi, everyone. I think this year Advamed has definitely saved the best panel for last. I will say that, setting high expectations, dear panelists. So we are going to talk about a topic that is dear to most CEOs. It's around CEO succession, C-suite succession, and talent development. And we have 3 CEOs today who will hopefully not only share their perspectives of what they're doing with their teams, but who will also share a little bit of their own stories in terms of how they have been developed to where they are today. Before we get started, could you please introduce yourselves very briefly?
Hi, Kevin Lobo, CEO of Stryker.
Can you guys hear us? Okay, good. Leslie Trigg, I'm the CEO of Outset Medical.
And Doug Godshall, CEO of Shockwave.
Okay, so let's start with your personal stories, if we can. Your route to the top. Can you tell us the specific people, specific experiences that you had that helped develop you to where you are today? And Leslie, let's maybe start with you. I've heard you talk a lot about mentorship by osmosis. So tell us a little bit about your story.
I'm sure a lot of us are asked the question, like, who was your mentor, singular? And when I was kind of earlier in my career, that really didn't make sense to me. And maybe that was a defensive mechanism because I didn't have a mentor. So I was like, oh, I don't want one. But I think what ended up making sense for me was this notion of like sort of osmotic mentorship, whether the person was more senior than me or at my level or beneath me. I have learned more on a daily basis from thinking about group mentorship, I guess would be another way to put it. So that's kind of part one, is really believing like I have something to learn from every single person I'm going to come across, and then your mentorship circle gets immense. I mean, it's almost infinite. And so that's one thing that's really worked for me. I think the other thing that, and I've been fortunate in this respect, I have had a couple of specific people who thought I was capable of doing more at times when I didn't see it. Mm-hmm. And I think there's an implication for those of us in the audience who are leaders. But there were a couple people in particular. I think about Dave Martin, who is the CEO of CSI, if you guys know Dave, and now Keith Grossman, who's the CEO of Nevro, who at certain moments kind of stepped up and said, no, you are going to do this and you're going to be great at it. And I think the implication for us as leaders is let's not forget to do that for others. People that are so obvious to us as leaders who have strengths that we assume that they see, don't assume that they see it, don't assume that they don't need to hear that affirmation or get those pushes at the right time.
And I would say, Leslie, specifically for women, right? Because often women underestimate and almost need that gentle push.
Yeah, and this could be certainly true. I've seen men in this category too, but I think particularly I've seen probably a little more women who, if there's 10 boxes that they think need to be checked to be effective in whatever that next role is, they need to make sure that they have checked 10 and a half. Or they're not qualified. And that's the way I felt. And again, at a few particular moments in time, somebody going like, don't worry about it, you'll figure it out. And you always do.
Yeah, absolutely. Kevin, what about you?
Actually, I'd say it's actually quite similar to Leslie's story. So I was born in India, grew up in Montreal. My parents never went to college. It is unimaginable to me that I'm the CEO of an American company. Because, when you grow up in Canada, Americans are kind of scary and big, scary creatures, and you just don't know that you could ever run with them. And so I had 2 people that really championed me. One that brought me to the U.S. for the first time in 1997. And my road is not obvious, right? Started in finance, started in chemicals and consumer products, wasn't in healthcare, didn't do sales and marketing, not American. So I don't really tick any of the boxes. Yeah. But what happened was this: he believed in me, and he sort of brought me to the United States. And I was young, and I didn't know I could even do it. And then I got there, and I realized, okay, I guess I can do this. And then my first job at Johnson & Johnson was 2003 at the Tylenol company. And my boss there was amazing, just an amazing, charismatic leader. And he basically pulled me aside. He kept giving me new responsibilities. And I'm like, after like the 3rd or 4th thing, I said, like, Bill, what's the deal? Like, why you keep giving me all these responsibilities? He looked at me and said, you have no idea how much bandwidth you have because you're not breaking a sweat. And you're way better than you think you are. And he was the first person that kind of put the thought in my mind that I could be a big leader. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying CEO, but like lead large global businesses. And he just pushed me and believed in me, and we still talk, and we're still friends. And he's just an awesome human being. But I think getting that belief
Yep.
was, for me, just not any different than for Leslie. And I think, taking challenging assignments, like I worked in Paris only in French for 2 years, and that was painful. And just being able to, sort of work in different environments. So stretching yourself, I guess, is important. I wasn't really afraid to try new things, but I didn't really know I had this in me until other people told me. So it's very similar.
And were you ever part of a formal succession process? Is that something that you were tapped on the shoulder for, you put your hand up for? How did that work?
Yeah, when I joined Stryker, I was hired in as a group president, and it was explicit, because Stryker doesn't bring people from the outside that much in sales and marketing roles, which we still don't bring people.
Yep.
Somehow I got in the side door. But when I was brought in, they explicitly told me they were trying to build succession for the CEO. Now, I didn't think it was going to happen so fast, like it was a year later, but I thought it would be 4 or 5 years later. But that was one of the reasons
You
that
joined.
drew me to Stryker, was knowing that could potentially happen at some point in the future. But that was the only time I was part of an explicit succession.
Doug, tell us about your story.
So I guess it's three of us that don't pick a specific mentor. If I had one, it's my father, who was also a J&J guy. And I still probably the one person who I go to for feedback consistently, although at the age of 84, he's a little less current in the feedback loop. But I still to this day learn so much from the people on my team, multiple levels within the team. I learn the most from people who disagree with me, and some, thank God, my team is populated with some people who disagree with me quite strongly. But as I was, since this is the sort of before I got to this job, I paid a lot of attention to the behaviors and habits that I didn't admire and I questioned. There was a phase at BSC when I was there where the CEO thought he was smarter than everybody else and intentionally created silos where the team did not really work well together. I'm like, that seems stupid, so I'm not going to do that if I ever am lucky enough to be a CEO. And I worked for the CFO for a while, might be the smartest person I ever worked for, but he also had some idiosyncrasies like yelling at me and telling me he was going to take my bonus if I didn't do my job well. And so I was like, I think I'm not going to do that either. And so I continue to try to pay really close attention to the things that people do better than me, which is a really long list, and try very hard to pay attention to the ineffective behaviors that people have and like, okay, I got to remember not to do that if put into that position.
Makes sense. It's as important to know what not to do as what to do, right? Completely agree with that. So we're seeing at Russell Reynolds, increasingly clients are talking to us about how they can help build C-suite internally, how they can build the talent for their C-suite internally rather than finding external talent. And we did a study recently that showed, particularly at the C-suite and the CEO level, internal candidates are twice more likely to be successful than external candidates. Kevin, you mentioned Stryker rarely goes external. I think you were the exception. You are particularly good at this. What is your secret sauce? How do you develop your talent so well? What do you do to make sure you have good succession?
Yeah, so Stryker, we're fortunate that we have a structure that has these decentralized business units that create these mini GM jobs for people that they can develop their sales, marketing, business acumen, buying companies, launching new products, and they can do it in smaller units, and then they move to larger units. And so our structure, we have a structural advantage in the way we're organized. It's a bit more expensive, but it drives growth and it creates that kind of general management skill set. And so that's part of its structure. The second thing I would say is, culturally, we really like to give autonomy. So we have HR told me we have 455 sales comp plans in the company. I'm like, okay, that's good. And not the reaction she was expecting when she told me that. I said, well, yeah, let each division figure out how they want to pay their salespeople. That's not my job. Like they can decide. We sell beds and we sell neurovascular coils that go into your brain. Maybe the sales comp program should be different for those products. They bear no resemblance to each other. And so I think giving autonomy, having people that know your culture is really, really important. I think if you're a company that's performing well, why are you going outside?
Yeah.
You should be developing your talent from the inside. You should go outside if you're in trouble, you're in a turnaround, you need to shift course, you need a different kind of skill set. So that's kind of our mindset is, part of the leader's job is you better build a talent bench. We have very sophisticated programs. We do an engagement survey once a year. Everybody with more than 4 people get a report, so bad managers can't hide. It's hard to hide. And then we do talent review on a quarterly basis where we ask the teams, who is your next talent? What's your succession bench look like? And I do that with my direct reports. They do that with their direct reports. So it's very, very rigorous, and we take it very seriously. And for that reason, we don't tend to go outside that much. And as your growth is, of course, important, right? So, these guys grow too. They're growing. I'd like to grow as fast as some of them, but for a big company like ours, if you're growing 10%, you're creating more business units.
Yep.
We had 14 10 years ago. We have 22 now. So that kind of growth then creates opportunities for people. If we weren't growing, then it gets hard
Yep.
to have opportunities for everyone.
And how do you think about developing maybe some of the softer skills?
In our training programs, we do a lot of soft skill development, and we do individualized development programs for people. And so sometimes that involves a coach, sometimes that involves going to certain sessions and just giving active feedback. But yeah, soft skills are massively important. For me, I think soft skills have been more important to me
Yes.
than hard skills,
Yep.
as I've changed industries multiple times.
And harder to develop.
Yeah, you want to develop them as early as you can.
Yeah.
And giving honest feedback. Let's face it, human beings are not great at giving and telling other human beings what they're not good at, what they need to improve. And you just have to try to create a culture of trust. And people want feedback. They don't only want to know what they're great at. And the earlier you can give them that feedback in their career, the better they can be. But we also at Stryker, we focus more on strengths than we do on fixing people. Mm-hmm. So we like people to soar with their strengths. That's our term we use. And we try to put people in jobs that play to their strengths. And you should be aware of your weaknesses, but it's a weakness, you're never going to be great at it. Right? You just want to not be deficient. You just want to get to sort of base level. But that's sort of our mindset.
Thank you. Doug, what about you?
Yeah, so we are transitioning as a company more sort of mentally for ourselves. Like when I started, we had 90 employees. Now we have 1,300 or so, and yet a lot of our mindset is we're still entrepreneurial. We're still a small company, and yet we've populated ourselves with a bunch of people who are like, okay, this is a major part of my career. I want to develop in advance, and we've had to sort of catch up with our employee base because when I started most of the people there assumed we were just going to get acquired, so then I'll do my next gig.
Yeah.
And so as over the past 3 years, we've realized people chose to be here, and we plan on building a very vibrant enterprise for the next decade, and that means these employees, we want them to be here and grow and flourish well into the future. And so we've had to build training, build succession processes, and we're very much midstream of building these. And we do talent reviews regularly, and yet we also have been hiring hundreds of people every quarter, or probably about 100 a quarter for a while now. And we've just been plugging new people into roles and not always having enough time to develop and fill some of the roles with homegrown talent. I think some of that hiring is going to slow down a little bit, and we have really tried as best we can to, if we can wait an extra 6 months because Susan's almost ready. Let's give that job to Susan, and even if it's a stretch, it sends such an incredibly positive signal throughout the organization. It also reinforces for other people, like, she got it. What do I need to do? And they're not necessarily going to just hire somebody over me every single time.
Yes.
You're starting to sort of grow from within instead of just hire from without.
Yeah. Which also builds loyalty.
Oh,
right?
it's very much so, yeah.
Leslie, your perspective.
Yeah, this has been a really, really relevant question for us because we're in the dialysis space and we are trying to do something that not that your business isn't complicated, but mine's more complicated.
Yours is hard.
It's way harder. So here's my point. It's not a space that a lot of people have a lot of experience in. And so when someone's been at Outset, even for a year, they have developed really quite, from a market perspective, proprietary knowledge of all the structural barriers, the complexity. We're in the acute space, we're in subacute, we're in home. The reimbursement is different. The regulatory environment is different. There's a lot. When I first landed in this, I had done mostly cardiology, and I found almost nothing that was transferable from what I had done in cardiology over to what we're doing. We had to create from scratch everything. So anyway, this isn't like a poor me thing, but it is more complicated than shock. But that's the only thing I can win on. It's the only thing. Each person who has acquired this knowledge is gold. Very, very valuable. So our whole, really, we rarely promote from the outside. And as a smaller company, I can afford to take more risks in small ways.
Yep.
Promoting somebody who's never managed before, everybody's got to be a first-time manager somewhere. I'm willing to do it at Outset. Because we do have very senior, seasoned people, by and large, in VPs and C-level. So we do spend a lot of time on coaching. I think a few takeaways that are relevant for any leader, it doesn't matter if you're a CEO or running a team of two, I found more success in bite-sized feedback versus full entrees.
Yep.
And that's for me too, and I'm guilty of it, like if I let it build and build and build, it will boil over, and it's not a productive conversation for either party. So I've really tried to adjust my style. I just gave somebody feedback actually sitting in the car when I pulled in the parking lot about a small thing, one presentation. Hey, you're sending this to the CEO of a health system. I am a CEO, and I'm going to tell you 3 things that did not resonate with me. It's no big deal, but just make the adjustment. That's like a bite-sized piece versus a large entree.
Yep.
So that's one thing I think is really I think it'll be more effective regardless of how many people you're leading. And then I would say the other thing is coach and expose in small ways. So more at a C level, I will do small things like forward to somebody on my team an email I sent to the board. I'm not necessarily going to copy them on a board email, but I will forward something I've sent to my board because I'm giving that individual exposure to, here's how I address this topic. Now you could do that. Maybe you're going to forward an email that you sent to your VP or your director or your EVP, whoever it is. You're giving that person on your team exposure to, here's how I'm thinking about this. Here's how I communicated that, because it is the soft skills. That's where people get tripped up again and again and again. So small acts
Yep.
and bite-sized, not full entree would be my
Yep.
pieces of advice.
And I think everything that you have said, all of you have said, really helps on the retention. The people sitting from where I am, the people that are at risk to acting on that call are the people who don't feel invested in and don't feel developed.
Yeah, we like to make your job hard.
But that's fine. Thanks, Kevin. As CEOs, when do you first broach the subject with your board, or when does your board first broach the subject with you on your own succession? And I'm going to go to you, Doug, because I love the expression that you've used, which is, it's a bit like talking about my own funeral. How do you talk about your own funeral with your board?
For me, very reluctantly, because it's all tied into the whole mortality, immortality thing that I have not come to grips with yet.
Yeah.
My board came to me at Shockwave on succession because they were talking to a few of my direct reports, and it was very flattering. They all said they loved working for me, and they didn't know if they'd want to still be here after I left. And the board started adding up the number of people who claimed they would leave when I left, which wouldn't be true. But they panicked because like, oh my God, no one's going to be here. So we had to start thinking about Doug's succession, even though I had given no indication I was going to stop. And it is a very it's an unusual process to be mapping out something that I've made no commitment to do. And we just had a nominating governance committee meeting the other day, and they mapped out sort of, here's what people say about Doug, and here's what Doug's successor should look like. And it's like, I'm on this call. Like,
Yeah.
it's really strange talking about me as if I were dead. And so it's in some ways it's been unusual. In some ways it's been a little bit cathartic, because it is helpful to say, if if I want this company to be successful well into the future, as I do, and believe that it has incredible potential, it is important that I have a say and we all come to agreement on what does that person look like, and it also gives me an opportunity to think about, okay, if and when I come to, well, when, I assume someday I will say I want to stop doing this, what's the process by which we would sort of start that conversation with the board where I would, in theory, raise my hand and say, okay, 6 months from now, I think is the right time for me. It's a little hard because I love doing this. It's so fun building a team and watching customers react to what you're doing and watching people achieve things that they didn't think was possible. Like, I don't have hobbies that are better than this. So I don't know how I will backfill and that hole that would be in my life if I stopped doing this. But I think it's very, particularly for sort of smaller companies. I mean, Stryker's tremendous company and they have processes for everything. For a smaller company, I think it's good, diligent work by the board to step back and say, I like that my chairman says, if Doug hits the lottery, he doesn't like to say if Doug gets hit by a bus, which is the better outcome, preferably. But I think for a lot of mid to smaller companies, they would probably blow this off and then suddenly find themselves in a position where Doug hits the lottery and then they're scrambling. So I think it's good governance to do it proactively, even if it is really uncomfortable being the one you're talking about.
Yeah. And Leslie, you've talked about the process becoming a lot more formalized, even for a smaller company. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. That's a function of having a really good board and experienced board members. But I think about it in the following fashion. An expectation that I have of everybody who reports to me and then the VPs below is that they are actively developing their own succession plan, right? That's an expectation that I have put on everybody at a leadership level. Why would I not hold myself accountable to the same deliverable? So for me, it is completely and truly not emotional, not personal. So that's point one. Point two, it's helped me a lot to serve on other boards.
Yes.
Again, it really depersonalizes it. Since being on other boards, being on NomGov committees, it is truly not personal. It's about the organization and it's about the organization's mission and ensuring that the organization has an enduring future, its patients, its employees, et cetera. And so I look at it, I guess, fairly dispassionately. Not that I don't want to continue in the role, but what I care more about is not myself. What I care the most about is Outset itself and making sure that this is an organization that has, a 10, 15, and 20-year legacy, and that's part of serving the mission.
Yeah. Kevin, over to you. You do have fantastic successors. When did you start thinking about succession?
So I've been the CEO of Stryker for 10 and a half years now. And when I first got the job, the board asked me sort of the very first year, we do our succession every fall, once a year, and we sort of update that every year very systematically. So when it came time to my first year, I said to them, here's how long I think I want to stay in the company, which was basically till I retire. This is what I told them 10 and a half years ago. I said, I'm not interested in doing a larger company or moving on to another industry or anything like that. If I love this company, I love the culture, my goal would be, assuming I perform and you're happy with me, would be to stay till I retire. So that's going to be a long time. And then every year I update them on whether that's thoughts changed or has not changed. And then I told my wife, look, hey, if I get past the third year, this is going to be a long run. Because if you notice, CEOs, about a third, almost a little more than a third, don't make it past their third year. But once you get past the third year, usually, unless something weird happens, behaviorally or whatever, you tend to have a pretty good run. So once I got past the third year, fourth year, then I started thinking, I've never been in a job this long in my life, and I'm starting to be a blocker. And I don't want to be a blocker because I have other people that need to be developed and grown, and if I become a blocker, they're going to leave. So then I decided to make Tim Scannell President and COO, a job that didn't exist in the company before. So he got a promotion, he was all thrilled, and then I promoted, that caused 2 more group presidents and then 2 more division presidents. So just a cascade of promotions occurred. And I knew Tim only had 3 years left before he was going to retire. Of course, I didn't tell anybody that. We didn't tell anybody that. And when he retired, then those 2 group presidents now report to me directly.
Yep.
And I started giving them international roles. Getting them on outside boards. They attend, my whole team sits into all of our board meetings except the executive sessions. So they are spending lots of time on the board. They understand, they actually sit in some of the committee meetings, NomGov, audit, so they know what that's all about. And so my goal is to develop those 2, and one of those 2 is going to take over for me, and you know who they are, and you're not going to be able to take them out of Stryker.
No, I can vouch
I wish
for
you
that.
luck, but really they're fantastic. And I even told the board, back when I became CEO, I said, look, if I have this kind of long run to when I retire, if we don't hand the keys off to an internal person, that is a failure. If I have that much time and I don't develop someone, I really suck as a CEO. I mean, it's just inexcusable. For me not to have developed at least one option. I want to give the board a couple of options that are both, going to be able to do this job. At least 2, maybe more. We'll see. And so that's the process that we're on. And when they're ready, that'll be time for me to step aside. Even if I love it, and I just, being a blocker to me is kind of problematic.
Yep.
I just don't want to do that. And but they've just taken on new responsibilities. They're still developing. They're still growing. I'm loving what I'm doing, and my intent is to retire, and one of those will take over, and we'll see. The other one you're going to probably want to headhunt, but
Absolutely.
But there's always a chance we could have a president COO and make you suffer some more.
On that note, though, Kevin, do you worry about having a 2-man race? Well, on the one hand, it's fantastic because it gives you and the board optionality. On the other hand, it does mean that one of them who has been so loyal for so many years and has done a tremendous job is a higher retention risk.
Look, there's always a chance that happens. That happens in every company. Look, it's just, that's how life is. And I think they've spent more than 20 plus 25 years at Stryker. They love the company. They love the culture. There's an opportunity for 2 promotions. If they both have their hearts set on being a CEO and they want to leave, they'll leave.
Yeah.
But I'm not overly worried about it. And plus, we're lining up more talent behind them, and so I'm not overly worried about it. If that happens, it happens. But I'm not seeing. They know each other. They've been together so long. We have interdependencies. So one has Asia Pacific, one has Latin America, Europe, and Canada. Guess what? The other person's businesses are in those countries.
Yeah.
So we
That's
have
clever.
mutual interdependencies created by our structure. One has business development, one has strategic planning. So they, by definition, have to work together. And I've told them, look, if this starts to get competitive and I start to see one-upmanship behavior, that is disqualifying.
Yeah.
You're disqualified. If you start trying to put down the other person, you're out. So I didn't have to say that, but I chose to say that to be really clear that being a good teammate is essential for us to be able to trust you with the entire company.
Yep. We still have a couple of minutes. Any questions from the audience? No? Yes.
Hello. Thank you all for your comments today. I am a new engineer. I work in the manufacturing space, and I'm interested in eventually having my own startup. I am not typically the type of person that comes up with designs, but I'm better with strategy. In terms of teams, what are the best ways to actually source new teams when you're trying to establish one? So if you don't have a background or know where to get them, where can you find people that will help you to make your vision come to life or help you to eventually have your own medical device company?
As a startup, right?
As a
Yeah,
startup.
Yeah.
You can do this one.
Yeah. Yeah, what are your thoughts? Yeah. Well, you'll have thoughts too because you're also a founder. I would say so. So when I got involved with Outset, it was 4 people. So I was not a founder, but it sure felt like it. And so we had to do a lot of recruiting. And I would say that there are certainly seasons. What I've learned is there are seasons of people and even team members that are appropriate for stage. At the very, very beginning, which would be similar to you starting your own company and it's 4 people, you're going to kind of go for people, I would call them the intrepid. their number one attribute is they are actually willing to work on this. And they see what you see. They are willing to leap before they look, because you're not going to have a lot of facts to offer them. There's not going to be a large evidence base that this is going to work. I would tend to rotate on those attributes way over technical attributes. There's plenty of smart mechanical engineers. You need an ME, you need an EE, you need a systems engineer, you need a software person, blah, blah. There's plenty of smart people. There are many fewer of those smart people that actually have the faith-based qualities that you're going to need to convince them to join a team that probably has a higher success of failure than success. So that would be my advice to you, is make sure that you're looking for the right thing, because you often don't see what you're not looking for. I don't know if you'd say anything different.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said about seasons is right. You want to take your idea far enough so that you actually can hook some of those early entrepreneurial types. You can't just say, I'm going to start a company and can't really tell you what it's going to be. But you will find the folks who can imagine how good it's going to be, and who love that creation phase of a startup. And they probably won't still be there if you are really successful 5 or 6 years later and you're starting to look at commercializing. Those folks, it's harder for them to, like, wait a minute, we're really not going to sell this company yet, and you have to try to keep their entrepreneurial spirit and keep them engaged, or not keep them engaged, because that next phase, as you're going through approvals and looking at commercializing, is scary and uninteresting to the folks who loved the fact that when they showed up at work, they both had to sort of take out the garbage and design the catheter and test everything. When they have to run half the company 3 years later, when they have a very specific job, and you start taking responsibilities away from them. For some people, that's very frustrating, because they wanted to run the clinical trial and sales and marketing and the IT system, and so rescoping the job, keeping people that you really want to keep and keeping them motivated, but in a narrower role, is really challenging.
Panelists, thank you so much for your time and sharing your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.